All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into one of the most incredible, high-stakes journeys in all of modern science. We're talking about the path a medicine takes, from just a tiny speck in a lab beaker all the way to being made by the billions. So let's imagine you've done it. You've discovered that miracle molecule. But here's the thing, that's just step one. The real mountain to climb is this. How in the world do you go from making just a few grams of something in a lab to producing millions, maybe even billions of pills that are all perfectly identical, perfectly safe, and perfectly effective for every single person who needs one? You see, that journey, it's a whole science in and of itself. It's this incredibly careful process of translation. Think of it like a bridge, right? A bridge from a brilliant idea to a cure that can actually help people. And that bridge, well, it's built on two key ideas we really need to get our heads around. Okay, first up, the pilot plant. The best way to think about this is like a dress rehearsal before the big show. It's basically a mini factory. It's the critical testing ground where scientists and engineers find out if the recipe that worked perfectly in a little glass beaker has any chance of working in a giant stainless steel production vat. And that brings us right to the next piece of the puzzle, scale up. So if the pilot plant is the dress rehearsal, then scale up, that's the art of actually writing the final script for opening night. It's the whole process of taking everything you learned in that mini factory, all the data, all the mistakes, and using it to design the full-scale, real-deal manufacturing operation. Now, the main goal of the pilot plant isn't just to make a bigger batch. Oh no. It's really about finding every single thing that could possibly go wrong, and I mean everything, and fixing it before you've sunk millions of dollars into a massive production line. It's all about hunting down problems early to make sure the final product is safe and you don't go bankrupt in the process. So how do you actually do this? I mean, you can't just start using bigger pots and hope for the best, right? You need a master plan, a real blueprint for success that thinks about every single variable before a single barrel of ingredients is even ordered. And this blueprint, it really comes down to four essential things. You've got to have the right team, the right space, the right materials, and a process that is nailed down to the tiniest detail. Let's talk about that team. Building the right one is kind of like putting together a team of translators. You need the scientists who get the why behind the chemistry, but you also need the engineers who understand the nuts and bolts of the factory floor. They absolutely have to speak both languages to make this work. And when it comes to equipment, you run into what I like to call the Goldilocks problem. It's perfect. If your pilot plant mixer is too small, the data you collect is totally useless for the giant one you'll use in production. But if it's too big, well, you'll just be wasting a fortune in super expensive ingredients on every single test run. It has to be, you guessed it, just right. And then there's the process itself. Every single one of these questions has to be answered with absolute pinpoint precision. Because look, a change of just a few RPMs on a mixer or adding one extra minute in a dryer, it might seem like nothing in the pilot plant. But when you scale that up to a 1,000-liter batch, those tiny little deviations can cause a total failure. We're talking an entire expensive batch down the drain. Okay, so now that we have the master plan, let's dive into our next section and see how this all applies to the most common and, honestly, one of the most challenging forms of medicine out there, the good old solid pill. I mean, it seems like it should be easy, doesn't it? You just take the powder, mix it with some other stuff, and press it into a pill. Simple. But the reality? Raw powders can be an absolute nightmare at a large scale. They get sticky, they get fluffy, they just refuse to flow evenly, all of which makes it pretty much impossible to make a consistent, safe pill. So the solution to this whole powder problem is a clever process called granulation. You can think of it as, well, convincing all those tiny powder particles to stick together. You get them to form larger, more uniform granules. And these granules, they flow beautifully, kind of like sand, instead of clumping up like flour. And that is the secret to making sure every single pill that gets stamped out has the exact same amount of medicine. So this is the classic journey from a difficult powder to a perfect pill. It really is like a carefully choreographed dance. First, you blend everything perfectly, then you granulate it so it'll flow. After that, you dry it to the exact right consistency, and finally, you compress it with an incredible amount of force into the final tablet. And here it is, the bottom line. All that science, all that meticulous planning, it all comes down to this one moment. Can your beautiful, perfect granulation survive the absolutely brutal, lightning-fast environment of a modern tablet press? I mean, these things can stamp out hundreds of thousands of tills an hour. If the answer is no, well, you're going right back to the drawing board. But of course, not all medicines are pills. So let's move on to our next section, liquids and semisolids. Now, the same basic principles of careful scale-up apply here. But things like syrups, creams, and ointments, they each bring their own unique and sometimes very tricky set of challenges to the table.
So when you're scaling up a liquid, believe it or not, your biggest enemy can be air bubbles. Yeah. If you mix a giant tank of syrup too fast, you can just whip it up into a useless foam. You also have to worry about making sure that anything suspended in the liquid stays evenly mixed and doesn't get accidentally filtered out, because that would completely mess up the dose.
Now, scaling up semisolids, that's a whole other ballgame. It's really a game of physics and just brute force. I want you to picture trying to mix a bathtub full of really thick, sticky ointment. You'd need incredibly powerful motors, specially designed mixers, just to keep it uniform. And then you'd need special pumps just to move that thick gunk from the vat to the filling line without wrecking its texture. Okay, for our final section, let's talk about the rules of the road. Because this whole intricate dance from the lab to the factory, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It is all overseen by really strict government regulations, and it's constantly evolving with new technology and new ways of thinking. See, once a drug is officially approved, you can't just wake up one day and decide to swap out an ingredient or use a different piece of equipment. That's where something called the SUPEC guidelines come in. They exist specifically to manage any changes you make after a drug is already on the market. It's all about making sure that even a tiny little tweak to the process doesn't accidentally mess with the safety or the effectiveness of the medicine people are taking. And these guidelines, they break down changes into 3 different levels. You've got level 1, which is something minor, like changing a flavor. No big deal. But then you have level 2 or level 3 changes. And these are the serious ones. We're talking about using a different grade of a key ingredient or even moving the factory. These are things that could have a really significant impact, and they require a ton more testing and reporting back to the regulators. So what's next? Where is all this heading? Well, the future is all about getting smarter and more efficient. And a huge part of that is something called platform technology. The idea here is just brilliant, really. Instead of completely reinventing the wheel for every single new drug, why not create a standardized toolkit, a kind of master recipe that you can just adapt for new molecules as they come along? And you start to see this popping up everywhere. A company will develop a really good sustained release technology, for example, and then just apply that same core tech to a bunch of different drugs. Or they'll create modular parts for medical devices so that the safety testing from one product can help speed up the next one. It's all about using what you already know to build things faster, better, and way more reliably. So when you step back and look at it, the big takeaway here is that this whole idea, this careful, methodical process of testing at an intermediate scale, it's not just for making medicine. It's really a universal principle for success in almost any complex project. I mean, think about it. Whether you're launching a new app, building a skyscraper, or even planning a city, the lesson is exactly the same. You have to test, you have to refine, and you have to perfect your process in your own version of a pilot plant before you go all in and bet the farm on the full-scale launch.